Hello, my favorite bookworms. We have a big list of books to get through today, so we are going to dive right in this episode of Book Club Fridays. So, first, we are going to talk about a contemporary romance novel that I read called Beneath the Stars by Emily McIntire. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. If not, I apologize. But I have never read a book by this author. And I was just strolling through Meyer one day, and of course, the book kiosk in the middle of the aisle snatched my attention, and I picked this book up, and I loved the cover, and for whatever reason, it just kind of drew me in. I liked the vibe, and I am glad that I did pick it up because I thoroughly enjoyed this story. This is the first book in her Sugar Lake series. There are a total of 4 books, but this one finds Chase and Alina at center stage. Chase Adams comes to town with his sister and moves in a couple doors down from Alina Carson. The Adams siblings are foster children who have ended up in Sugar Lake, Tennessee, where they are adopted by their current foster parents. From the beginning, one thing that stood out to me with this book was that the author wrote it in dual point of view, but it ages the characters throughout. So they start at ages 8 and 10, and then it ends with them at the ages of 26 and 28. So you just really get to see the entirety of their relationship from start to finish, which I really enjoy. I've written a book series similar on Wattpad, with that in mind, not necessarily starting at that young of an age, but just when you can read and experience the full spectrum of 2 characters' relationship, I think that that's just cool and different. And I love all of the detail and all of the storytelling that comes with that. So, at the beginning of the story, I was a little nervous because I thought some of the dialogue was a little cheesy, but I was thoroughly surprised and pleasantly surprised by the emotional depth and the way the character arcs for each character unfolded throughout the book. Now, I have read in some reviews that Alina, the female MC, her character arc really continues throughout this series, which I could see that, how the book ended, I could see how her character arc could continue to grow and evolve throughout the series. But yeah, I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed and didn't expect specifically the main turn that the story takes at the pivotal point in the middle. Anyways, the tropes in this book are best friend's brother, second chance, and small town. I will say some of the trigger warnings are definitely grief, addiction, and verbal abuse. That was a pretty profound part of the storyline in the second half of the book. So be aware. Always read trigger warnings before you read stories if you are sensitive to specific subjects. I think that that is very important because just because it has a cartoon-esque cover does not mean that there are not going to be those deep elements that can be triggering for some people. But throughout the story, you get to see how Alina and Chase connect as kids. They create a safety with each other and just this really unique bond that continues to build as they get older. Obviously, as they grow into the teenage years, the chemistry builds, their relationship begins to change, and then they finally give in to their romantic relationship. And as their relationship evolves in a romantic setting, Chase eventually moves away to college and Alina stays in Sugar Lake to finish out high school. But their relationship gets more complicated with the distance, with the space, with the childhood trauma that he is trying to run away from at that point. And his past really starts to project into how he handles certain circumstances. And that definitely leads to a lot of miscommunication, which they get a free pass for because they are young. So just to throw that out there, the miscommunication trope can definitely get annoying to me when they are adults. If they are young adults or, college age, I give them a free pass. So that part takes place when he is in college and she is still in high school. But that begins to build pretty significantly. And at a very pivotal part in the story, when Alina needs Chase the most, he isn't there. His priorities are very distracted, and it leaves her dealing with a very significant tragedy and, in the end, a broken heart. As I said, it is a second chance romance. So they do break up. But from that point, you see how different the lives of our two main characters become. Alina's dreams of becoming a dance instructor get put on the back burner, but Chase leaves town and doesn't come back for 8 years until an opportunity presents itself that he cannot refuse. And they are once again brought back in each other's orbit. Because of course that's what we love. We love that good, like, spicy, angsty reunion. But what I really loved about these characters, I loved their banter. I loved their tension. I loved the safety that they had with each other, even when there was distance. There was always this tether that connected them. And I think that that was depicted very beautifully in the story. And what I loved about Chase's character development is that his journey with therapy was a really big part of his story, as well as it included his journal entries that he did as part of his therapeutic journey. And I thought that that was a very interesting and unique dynamic. And it was really intriguing to me because I love when it's presented through the male's perspective of going to therapy, reaching out for help. And even though he didn't understand in the beginning how this was going to help him at all, he still chose to show up and lean into it. And you get to see that growth in him throughout the last half of the book. And I really thought that that was really nice to see. And she wrote that extremely well. I love that he chose to get help to change and heal from his past rather than just like miraculously showing back up in town 8 years later and, being an entirely different person. Like, she showed how he got there and how he had to deal with his trauma, and being confident in that and that journey and that process with himself allowed him to really support Alina when he came back to town, and really helped her to navigate some of her trauma when they became friends again. I also really liked that their time apart was depicted realistically, because it wasn't like they spent 8 years pining for each other and like never being involved with anybody else, because that is not realistic. So I loved that it was depicted realistically, even though I think that Chase's like quote unquote girlfriend situation was like kind of a bit overdone in the end, but that's okay. Yeah, I still felt like some of the dialogue was like a little like cheesy and corny, but I don't know. Sometimes that's just the fun of it. I think that that's just the writing style, and depicting that Southern accent and Southern speak was cute. But yeah, like I said, could be a little cheesy at times. All in all, I really enjoyed this story, and I was like excited to read the book. And I love when I feel that way. So I gave it a 4.5 star, and I plan on reading the next book in the series, which I think is called Beneath the Hoop, and is about Alina's brother and another one of her best friends. So we'll have a whole other like best friends, brother's best friend situation, or best friend's brother. I always get those mixed up. So, okay, Now, this next book that I want to talk about is a memoir by Sarah Hepola, and it is called Blackout: Remembering the Things I Drank to Forget. And this book was so beautifully written. It was funny, it was vulnerable, and it was relatable in so many ways. I actually did read it. A lot of times I will listen to memoirs, but this one I actually bought and read. As someone who has been alcohol free for 4.5 years, it was very therapeutic for me to read someone else's story about their experience. I was able to see parts of myself and my history with alcohol through her story and find more clarity and understanding for what I went through in the process. Because, we can see our experiences and the things that we go through in life through our lens, through our perspective, and how it made us feel and what it unfolded in our life when we started peeling back those layers. But when you can read a story like this and relate to it, and you can start to see your experience a little bit through their lens, it just like peels back another layer of the onion. And that's what I felt like I got out of reading this book. I really related to the reasons why she drank in ridding her mind of insecurity, to get that incessant voice to finally shut the hell up, and to feel free enough from all of the reminders of the ways in which you could screw up to get quiet. My inner critic has always been extremely loud. And with that, I created a protective part of myself. So it was like bouncing back and forth internally with this raging war of being extremely critical of who I was and what I wanted and how I showed up in the world, to being constantly in a reactive state of defense. And that felt really hard, and I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know how to talk about it, because from the outside, like, people just looked at me and were like, oh, like, she's got it all together. Like, she's great. She's fun and bubbly and outgoing and pretty and, A, B, C, and D, all of these things. But like inside, I was a mess. And so I feel like when I did try to talk about that at sometimes, it was devalued a little bit because of how, again, like my life appeared from an outsider's perspective. And those two things, like those two parts of my life, that insecurity and that protective part, that defensive part, were in the driver's seat for such a long time, but probably most significantly in my late 20s. And what I had found in my life previously to that, but significantly as I got older, was that with a little booze in my system, they would finally sit down and stop bossing me around and making me feel like shit internally. I would get that break. I would get the break from the internal shitstorm that I felt like I was battling on a consistent basis. And so in the beginning of that, it would be really fun and it would be really carefree. But in the end, it would leave me with this shame spiral that was crippling. And so using alcohol to deal with that internal war zone, it wasn't the only reason why I drank, but being a significant part of that, I just wanted to escape everything that I felt, because I felt everything so deeply. I'm an extremely deep well, if you haven't noticed, if you haven't noticed in listening to these podcast episodes. But I always felt everything so deeply, and I was so sensitive, and I didn't know what to do with it. And most of the time I felt like it was a problem, that it meant that something was wrong with me. And honestly, I think it's such an easy thing for all of us to do, especially what I've noticed in a small town like the one that I live in, is for people to reach for booze to make ourselves feel more socially accepted, to turn off the voice in our heads that tell us we're not enough, or to really be able to just feel free enough to express ourselves in a way that we never felt like we could when we were sober. And the way that Sarah describes her story and her relationship with alcohol, I think can make anyone who has that question mark of if they drink too much or if alcohol has too much power in their life, feel seen and understood in a non-judgmental way. And that's really what I got out of this, and how she, really describes, like, alcoholism is all based on perspective. Like, what is an alcoholic? And yeah, there can be different descriptions and different functionalities of that. But I think what you have to do, and how she explains in her book, is you have to really get quiet enough to listen. Like, your intuition is going to tell you when something is a problem in your life. And it doesn't just have to be alcohol. It can be drugs. It can be sex. It can be gambling. It could be all of these vices that we lean on to escape our emotions or to make us feel included. And I think that it's so easy to want to run away, but it's really, really powerful to choose to stay and sit in your feelings. And when you take away one of your vices, it doesn't mean that you're always going to do it perfectly, but it really challenges you to sit with yourself and to sit with your feelings. And, that's what I had to do, because, like, when I was drinking, I was hilarious and I was fun, and I was usually the last to go to bed and the one putting out all of the fires that showed up after midnight. Yes, that was me chasing whoever out of the bar that was crying because they were fighting with their significant other, or, finding the drunkest person in the room and deciding that I was going to be their caretaker. It gave me a sense of purpose, even in that fuzzy state. And honestly, like, really expressed my codependency on being the hero and this, like, savior complex that I had. But that's just like a whole other, rabbit hole that we could go down. But as I started to understand over the last 4.5 years, as I've, like, started to understand significantly why I did drink and how I have been able to do a lot of healing around that, which, like, I'm going to dive into more thoroughly in a podcast episode of its own coming up in the next couple weeks. But I don't know, reading this memoir just kind of reminded me of all of that. And it reminded me of how far I've come in that aspect of my life. Because let me tell you, Party Paige, she was a hell of a good time. But real, authentic me, like, she's really, really great. And she doesn't come with a shame spiral the next morning or a miserable, miserable hangover. So I am grateful for that and grateful for my journey throughout all of this. But back to the book, I related to the way she also, like, she describes how empty she felt in her life when she was alone, tucked into her bed, and wondering if she was impossible to please, which is something an ex has said about me in the past, or if she was just unfulfilled. And again, I just related to that feeling because there were so many parts, like, so many times in my life, even now still, that I just come back to that limiting belief that I'm the problem. And knowing now the tools I have to walk myself out of that, I also see how and why I used alcohol as a tool, even though it wasn't a healthy one. Um, I was always just, like, teetering on trying to make myself fit into the life that I had created, to wondering if I should run away and burn it all down. But alcohol gave me that. It gave me this assurance that I wasn't the problem. It made me feel connected to those people around me, or it made me feel cool or grown up when I was younger. And I wanted nothing more than to just finally feel like I had a place where I belong. And I drank alcohol for the first time at the age of 13. And that wasn't saying that, like, I consistently drank from the times that I was 13 until 2021, but probably from the time that I was 17 and on, I definitely did. And it was just like this friend that I could hand the reins to and then blame if things went haywire, which they did often. And the worst part was, even though I was handing the reins and my power over to alcohol, I was the one who had to wake up the next morning and deal with the consequences and Sarah expresses how she had to do that so often in her life, even if it was in more extreme ways for a more extended period of time. But like, I was the one who was hungover. I was the one spiraling in shame. I was the one who had to piece together the night before and send an SOS text to my best friend asking if I was out of control or said anything stupid or whatever, because I did that so often. And she would very lovingly, most of the time, be like, "You are fine." You are fine. But it was becoming a problem because I felt more and more insignificant in my own life every single time I woke up with that guilt-ridden feeling in my gut. And no, like, I didn't necessarily identify myself as an alcoholic, but I think and I believe that if I hadn't quit drinking when I did, I could have definitely turned into one on a more extreme scale, like Sarah expresses in her experience with it in this book. And there were definitely years where my dependency on alcohol was greater. Hello, COVID 2020. Um, and again, like, throughout all of those years of that, starting at such a young age, it could have been to connect to my partner at the time. It could have been to connect to my friends, or to just feel comfortable in my own skin, or to deal with any uncomfortable emotions that were bubbling under the surface. So I don't know. Reading this book just really felt like an assurance that I wasn't alone in my experience. And it was really comforting to hear another person's story told in such an authentic, honest, and like truly entertaining way. Like, she did it with such a light heart. But at the end, I cried. It brought me to tears and I had like full body goosebumps. I would highly, highly recommend this book. And I gave it a 5-star rating. So, as always, if you or anyone that you know is struggling with dependency in any kind, in any kind, you are so brave for reaching out for help, for admitting that there is something that doesn't feel right. It doesn't matter the scale. You do not have to be a definition, quote unquote, definition, full blown alcoholic to feel as though you need help. If you feel inside that there is a disconnect, there is a discomfort, there is something inside of you telling you that this is becoming a problem, even if other people won't understand it, you are brave for reaching out for help. My DMs are always open. Okay. I'm a safe place. I promise. Now, the next book I'm going to talk about is an audiobook that I listened to, and it is a very long audiobook. It was like over 12 hours, but it is Letting Go: The Pathway to Surrender by David R. Hawkins. And I've said this many, many times this year, but this entire year has felt like a lesson in letting go over and over and over again. It's become quite annoying, if I'm being honest. But if you follow numerology at all, you will know that collectively we are in a year 9, which is all about letting go. I am also personally in a year 9. So just like double down on the letting go lessons here, friends. But as my life has really led to this space in time, my energy healer suggested this book. And so I decided to give it a listen. What I loved about it the most is that it's one of those books that I didn't have to try hard to listen to. I felt like I could like zone in and out of what he was saying, but I still understood it. Like, it was as if it like sank into me without really having to actively focus, and which is a nice change for a self-development book, and also something that like he expresses at the beginning. Like, this book is going to transform you if you listen to it or read it from start to finish, whether or not you are fully like immersed in what he is saying. It's just like the energy of it will really sink into you. And I have definitely felt that and experienced that with listening to this book. And there are just so many lessons that the art of letting go can teach us. We just have to be willing to surrender. And That's really hard. Surrender is really hard for all of us because we want to believe that we can control the outcomes, and we want to believe that we have it all figured out. And our pride tells us that we have to be the ones to do it. And at the end of the day, that's really untrue. And we don't have to have all of the answers. And to live a fulfilled life, to live a life full of purpose and freedom, of control, we just have to get out of our own way. And as humans, that's the thing we love to do the most, is to continually get in our own way. And so as I listened, it was really interesting to see how the art of letting go can truly affect our lives in all its different aspects. He talks about how it affects love, how it affects peace, how it affects transformation in our relationships, and many, many different ways. But he shares how the art of letting go can truly affect our lives in positives, but also if we refuse to do it, and how we can stay stuck and stagnant, and what that can turn into specifically in our health, in our relationships, in love, and in our mental state. For a very long time, even before I understood it, I've always desired a life of freedom. And I used to believe that it was things in the outside world that were constantly keeping me trapped. But what I have learned this year is that I am the one, that my own mind, my own pride, and my own ego is what has kept me in a box all along. It has been fear, it has been resistance, and it has been this desire to control the outcomes to keep myself safe. And so as I have had to take a finger off the wheel, it's like that death grip, and slowly releasing as this year has progressed, it's been a challenge. And it's really shown me the ways in which I can lean into life instead of constantly being in contrast with it. So this book was a really great tool as I continued to embark on this lesson of letting go. And I feel like I'm a lot more grounded in knowing that at the end of the day, I can embrace and accept all that life has to offer me, whether it's what I envisioned or not, or whether it comes in the timing that I would like it to or not. Because as I have shared many times, being impulsive and being patient. Being impulsive, I'm really good at. Being patient, not so much. So the letting go has definitely really struck those chords. And I've really had to rein myself back in and practice patience. And what I am continuing to learn, the more you surrender to life, the closer you get to a life you truly love, the more free you actually feel, because the battle, the box, like that's in here. It's not outside in the world. It's not the relationship. It's not how much money is in your bank account. It's not your job. It's in here. Those external things can be changed. Yes, absolutely. And sometimes it's necessary, but it's the work that's done in here that is going to change the outcomes of how we fit into these environments, into these relationships in our outside world. And so when we can get out of our own way, when we can release pride that we cling to so desperately, or fear, or guilt, whatever it may be, and when we can let God align our lives with what was meant for us all along, that's really, really beautiful. And I highly recommend this book. I rated it 5 stars. Like I said, it is an extremely long listen, or at least for me, 12 hours is a long listen. But yeah, I felt like it was really great, and it was really digestible too. It wasn't super convoluted, and I didn't leave it being like, sometimes I read a self-development book and I'm like, am I stupid? Because I felt like a lot of that went over my head. So did not feel this way with this book. Highly recommend. Nice job, David Hawkins. All right. The last book I want to talk about is called Life Cycles: Your Emotional Journey to Freedom and Happiness by Christine Delorey. This is for, again, anyone interested in numerology or who just enjoys having a guide of the energies each year and month. This book was recommended to me by a mentor and friend. Her name's Emma. And I've used it over the last year, and it's really been interesting to see just how accurate numerology can be when you apply it to your life. And learning what life path number you are, what energy each year brings, and what month brings. So, for those of you, to backtrack, who don't know what numerology is, this book starts by explaining it, and it explains the science behind it and the life cycles that we are all currently partaking in, whether we know it or not, because numbers are natural elements and they are used to count, measure, and depict time in our world. And so this book is just an extension of how that affects our everyday life. And it will teach you how to discover what life path number you are, and then we'll give you a description of understanding of what that could mean about your life path here on Earth. And it's like the things that you are naturally born to do or what may come as challenges. But then it further breaks it down to help you discover like the energy of where you are now, like what life path year you are in. And then it breaks it down even further to the energies or lessons that will arise each month within the year. So it's just another tool like astrology, like the Enneagram, like human design. It's another tool that can be utilized to help you understand yourself, to navigate this really confusing life and this complex experience that we're all trying to get through. But yeah, if you're interested in learning more or just, I don't know, think this shit is cool, it's a really good way to start in dipping your toes in to these more unique forms of self understanding. So, once again, highly recommend. Alrighty, guys. Well, that is all I've got for you this week. I hope you found something to add to your TBR. And as always, please follow, rate, or review, and come say hi over on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Turn the Page Podcast. All right. Bye-bye.